There is a curious question that few of us ever stop long enough to ask. What if some of the health advice we have trusted for decades was never entirely wrong, but never entirely complete either? What if some of the habits we inherited from our parents and grandparents, the ones that became so familiar we stopped questioning them altogether, were quietly hiding stories that ordinary people were never encouraged to hear? And what if the greatest health myths are not the ones that sound unbelievable, but the ones that sound so perfectly reasonable that millions of Americans continue repeating them every single day without hesitation? For generations, health has been one of life's most trusted conversations. It is passed from one generation to the next, around dinner tables and front porches. It appears in newspaper headlines, television programs, and well-meaning advice shared between friends who simply want the very best for the people they love. Entire generations have faithfully carried these beliefs through wars, economic hardships, extraordinary scientific discoveries, and some of the greatest technological revolutions in human history. Perhaps that is precisely why they became so difficult to question. The most persuasive myths are rarely born from deception. They survive because they contain familiar pieces of truth wrapped inside stories that feel comforting enough to become part of everyday life itself. Millions of Americans still begin their mornings believing things about their bodies that were accepted decades ago, without ever wondering where those beliefs began. Others quietly carry assumptions about aging, energy, food, exercise, and wellness that feel so ordinary they no longer seem worthy of curiosity at all. After all, why would we question something we have believed our entire lives? History offers a fascinating answer to that question. Human beings have always understood far less about their own remarkable bodies than they imagined at the time. Ancient physicians once believed illness was caused by invisible imbalances that could be corrected through extraordinary rituals now preserved only within history books. Entire civilizations faithfully practiced remedies that survived for centuries before quietly surrendering themselves to newer discoveries. Even within our own lifetimes, ideas once presented with absolute certainty have gradually revealed themselves to be far more extraordinary and far more complicated than anyone previously imagined. The story of human health has never truly been a story of right and wrong. It has always been a story of discovery. That may be one of history's greatest hidden truths. We are constantly learning, quietly, patiently, generation after generation. Yet something remarkable happens when ideas survive long enough to become traditions. They stop sounding like opinions and begin sounding like timeless truths. Eventually, we stop asking where they came from altogether. Drink more water and you will automatically feel better. Certain aches are simply part of growing older. If something feels natural, it must always be harmless. If millions of people have believed something for generations, surely there could be no reason to question it now. Could there? What if some of life's most familiar health advice has been quietly missing important chapters of the story all along? That question becomes increasingly fascinating after the age of 40 and 50. Growing older possesses extraordinary gifts that youth occasionally overlooks. We begin recognizing that life's greatest lessons are rarely discovered all at once. They reveal themselves patiently over time. We learn that certainty sometimes deserves curiosity, and that familiar experiences occasionally conceal extraordinary mysteries waiting quietly beneath the surface. Perhaps nowhere is that more true than when it comes to our health. Human beings possess a remarkable tendency to normalize whatever faithfully accompanies them long enough. Gradually feeling less energetic simply becomes part of life. Everyday discomfort quietly becomes expected. Habits inherited decades ago patiently continue following us into entirely different seasons of our lives without ever asking for our attention again. Eventually, familiarity itself becomes invisible. The hidden truths waiting throughout this documentary are not hidden because they are impossible to understand. They remain hidden because they are hiding in places we stopped looking years ago. Some of them began generations before we were born. Others quietly emerged during remarkable moments in American history when scientific understanding was still patiently unfolding. A few will challenge assumptions so ordinary that millions of Americans continue trusting them every single morning without ever imagining they deserve a second look. And perhaps that is what makes this journey so fascinating. This is not a documentary about dangerous secrets whispered quietly behind closed doors. It is a documentary about ordinary things hiding extraordinary stories. Throughout history, humanity has repeatedly discovered that its greatest misconceptions are rarely dramatic enough to announce themselves loudly. They patiently accompany us through everyday life instead. They become traditions, they become habits. Eventually, they become part of who we are. Until one day, history quietly asks us to look again. Over the next 42 revelations, we will uncover health myths that have survived generations precisely because they sound reasonable enough to believe. Some were born during times when medical understanding looked remarkably different than it does today. Others quietly transformed as science continued revealing extraordinary truths about the remarkable complexity of the human body. A few may forever change the way you think about aging itself. You will discover that some of the things we blame on growing older may tell entirely different stories than we have been led to believe. You will uncover fascinating historical moments that shaped the health advice millions of Americans continue following today. And perhaps most remarkably of all, you may begin seeing familiar habits through entirely different eyes. Yet the greatest revelations remain patiently waiting beyond the horizon. Because these hidden truths are not equal. Some will simply make you pause for a moment and wonder why nobody ever shared the rest of the story before. Others may challenge beliefs you have carried faithfully throughout your entire life. And somewhere near the end of this remarkable journey waits a revelation so profound that it quietly changes the way every hidden truth before it is understood. That is why number 1 has patiently waited until the very end. Not because it is the most frightening revelation of all, but because it may be the most extraordinary. The remarkable truth waiting there has less to do with individual health myths themselves and far more to do with something humanity has quietly misunderstood for generations. But that story belongs to another chapter. For now, perhaps the most fascinating discovery is recognizing that the things we trust most deeply are occasionally the very things deserving our greatest curiosity. Human beings have always believed they finally understood the extraordinary mysteries of health, until history patiently revealed there was still more left to discover. And history has never stopped surprising us. After all, the greatest hidden truths are seldom hidden in distant places, waiting patiently to be uncovered. More often, they are quietly resting beside the ordinary things we stopped questioning long ago. The remarkable story of human health, it seems, is still being written, and some of its most fascinating chapters are only just beginning. Few things survive longer than the health advice passed faithfully from one generation to the next. Entire families preserve it without ever stopping to wonder where it began. We inherit these beliefs from loving parents, trusted physicians, magazine articles carefully clipped decades ago, and familiar voices patiently accompanying us throughout our lives. Eventually, they stop sounding like advice altogether and simply become truth. Yet history possesses a curious habit of quietly reminding us that even our most familiar assumptions occasionally conceal extraordinary stories waiting patiently beneath the surface. At number 42 waits one of the most enduring health myths in modern America. The belief that if something has not caused noticeable problems by now, then it never will. There is something wonderfully comforting about this idea. After all, millions of Americans have faithfully followed the same routines for decades. The same breakfast every morning, the same sleeping habits, the same understanding of what feels healthy and what does not. If these choices accompanied us peacefully through our 20s, 30s and 40s, surely there could be no reason to question them now. Could there? History quietly suggests otherwise. Human beings have always viewed health through the lens of immediate experiences. If something hurts, we pay attention. If something feels perfectly ordinary, we rarely invite curiosity into the conversation. Yet, our remarkable bodies have never been particularly interested in following humanity's preferred timelines. Some stories unfold immediately, others patiently reveal themselves across years and decades without ever announcing their quiet arrival. Previous generations understood this intuitively, even when they lacked the language required to explain it fully. Farmers carefully observed changing seasons because they understood that time quietly transforms everything it patiently accompanies. Human health behaves with similar elegance. The experiences of 25 are seldom identical to those of 55, even when our habits remain beautifully unchanged. After 40 and 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is recognizing that familiarity has never been identical to understanding. The fact that something feels ordinary does not necessarily mean its entire story has already been told. And if time quietly changes the remarkable relationship between our bodies and our daily habits, the next hidden truth challenges one of the most comforting beliefs Americans have carried for generations. At number 41 lies the remarkable myth that natural automatically means harmless. Few words have become more trusted in modern health conversations than natural. It appears faithfully beside countless products lining grocery store shelves. It quietly accompanies remedies passed lovingly between generations. Somewhere throughout history, humanity began associating nature itself with perfect safety. There is understandable beauty within that belief. Long before modern medicine transformed human civilization, people relied almost entirely upon nature's extraordinary gifts. Herbal traditions survived for centuries because they occasionally offered remarkable comfort during humanity's most difficult seasons. Grandmothers patiently preserved treasured remedies not because they possessed laboratories or scientific journals, but because they wished to share whatever wisdom faithfully accompanied them throughout their lives. Yet history quietly reminds us that nature has always possessed extraordinary complexity. The same natural world that offers magnificent forests and nourishing harvests also produces poisonous plants hidden quietly among extraordinary beauty. Human beings learned this lesson repeatedly throughout history, not because nature was cruel, but because it was infinitely more fascinating than simple assumptions occasionally allowed us to imagine. The hidden truth waiting here extends far beyond individual remedies or products themselves. Human health has never belonged exclusively to simple categories, patiently separating harmless things from harmful ones. Reality remains infinitely more remarkable than that. After 50, perhaps curiosity becomes life's greatest companion, precisely because it invites us to appreciate complexity without surrendering wonder itself. The most extraordinary truths are rarely found hiding at either extreme. They patiently reveal themselves somewhere beautifully in between. And speaking of remarkable assumptions quietly preserved throughout history, the next revelation explores a health myth millions of Americans continue repeating every single day without hesitation. At number 40 stands one of the most familiar misconceptions of all: the belief that feeling healthy automatically means being healthy. Human beings have always trusted their senses. We celebrate energetic mornings and quietly endure difficult afternoons. If we feel wonderful, we naturally assume all must be well. If we feel unwell, we patiently search for answers. The story seems beautifully straightforward, yet history tells us something infinitely more fascinating. The human body remains among the greatest mysteries humanity has ever encountered, precisely because it occasionally whispers long before it speaks loudly. Previous generations frequently described health not as the absence of discomfort, but as something far more remarkable: a delicate harmony patiently unfolding throughout everyday life itself. What most people never realize is that our bodies possess extraordinary capacities for adaptation. We become accustomed to countless experiences, gradually accompanying us throughout the years. Minor discomforts quietly become familiar companions. Changing energy quietly becomes expected. Eventually, yesterday's exceptions patiently transform themselves into today's ordinary experiences without ever formally introducing us to the change that quietly occurred. After 40 and 50, this hidden truth becomes increasingly meaningful because we occasionally begin confusing familiarity with normality itself. Feeling healthy remains one of life's greatest blessings, yet perhaps health has always been infinitely more extraordinary than merely the absence of obvious concerns. There are stories unfolding quietly within us every single day, beyond anything mirrors and calendars could ever adequately reveal. Human health has never been a destination patiently waiting for our arrival. It remains a remarkable journey of discovery, faithfully accompanying us throughout every passing decade. And if our understanding of health itself deserves greater curiosity than we once imagined, the final revelation of this chapter ventures deeper still. At number 39 waits one of humanity's oldest and most dangerous health myths: the belief that growing older inevitably means surrendering our expectations for vitality itself. Perhaps no misconception has quietly stolen more hope from generations of Americans than this one. Somewhere throughout our lives, many of us inherited an unspoken agreement with time itself. Youth belongs to energy, while age patiently claims whatever remains. Feeling tired becomes ordinary. Curiosity gradually fades into nostalgia. Extraordinary mornings quietly become treasured memories belonging exclusively to another season of life. History whispers something profoundly different. Every generation has been blessed with remarkable individuals whose enthusiasm for life quietly refuses to acknowledge such limitations. They continue learning, exploring, and embracing tomorrow with extraordinary wonder, regardless of how many birthdays faithfully accompany their journey. Their stories remind us of something beautifully hopeful. Human vitality has never been measured exclusively by calendars patiently hanging upon our walls. Growing older has always been one of life's greatest privileges, precisely because it offers treasures impossible to possess during our younger years. Perspective deepens. Gratitude quietly expands. Ordinary moments reveal extraordinary beauty previously hidden within plain sight. What most people never learn is that expectations possess extraordinary influence over the stories we quietly tell ourselves throughout our lives. Eventually, we stop asking questions simply because we have become convinced we already know the answers waiting patiently beyond them. After 50, perhaps curiosity becomes more valuable than certainty itself. The hidden truth waiting at number 39 is remarkably simple, yet profoundly meaningful. Age has never possessed the extraordinary power we occasionally grant it over our expectations for tomorrow. Human beings remain astonishingly capable of growth, discovery, and wonder throughout every remarkable season of life they are fortunate enough to experience. And if one of humanity's greatest misconceptions has been quietly persuading us to expect less from tomorrow than life was ever meant to offer, then the hidden truths waiting ahead become infinitely more fascinating still. Because some of the health myths patiently waiting to be uncovered have remained hidden in plain sight for generations, and their remarkable stories are only just beginning. History has always been filled with fascinating moments when humanity discovered that its greatest misunderstandings were hiding in the most ordinary places. The earth was once believed to stand perfectly still beneath our feet. Entire civilizations quietly accepted ideas that later generations would discover were merely the beginning of much larger stories. Human health has followed a remarkably similar path. With every passing decade, we uncover extraordinary truths that invite us to look once more at the familiar beliefs patiently accompanying us throughout our lives. And perhaps nowhere is this more fascinating than within the health myths millions of Americans continue trusting without ever imagining they deserve a second look. At number 38 waits one of modern life's most persuasive health myths: the belief that discomfort is simply something we should learn to live with as we grow older. There is something almost nostalgic about this idea. Many Americans grew up hearing familiar phrases repeated faithfully throughout childhood. "You're not 20 anymore. That's just part of getting older." Everyone feels that way eventually. These words were rarely spoken carelessly. More often than not, they were offered lovingly by people who themselves inherited the very same beliefs from previous generations. Over time, something remarkable begins to happen. Temporary experiences quietly become permanent expectations. We stop describing them as unusual and begin introducing them as part of our identities instead. Morning stiffness becomes my normal. Afternoon fatigue quietly joins the family dinner table every evening without anyone ever questioning why it arrived in the first place. History tells a fascinating story about human adaptation. Few creatures possess humanity's extraordinary ability to become accustomed to gradual change. We patiently adapt to colder winters, busier schedules, and changing seasons of life itself. Unfortunately, familiarity occasionally becomes one of history's greatest disguises. Experiences patiently accompanying us for years eventually stop asking for our attention altogether. After 40 and 50, perhaps curiosity becomes life's most valuable companion, precisely because it quietly asks questions certainty has long since stopped asking. Human health has never been merely about surviving another remarkable year. It remains an extraordinary conversation, patiently unfolding across every passing decade. And if discomfort itself occasionally deserves greater curiosity than we have been willing to offer it, the next revelation challenges something millions faithfully believe every single morning. At number 37 lies one of the most enduring misconceptions in American health culture: the belief that more is always better when something is considered healthy. Human beings have always been captivated by simple formulas. If something benefits us in moderation, surely more must offer even greater rewards. Throughout history, this remarkably persuasive idea has quietly accompanied humanity through countless chapters of discovery. The story itself feels beautifully logical. More exercise must always be better than less. More healthy habits must inevitably lead toward greater vitality. More attention devoted to wellness must naturally produce more extraordinary results. Yet, history quietly reminds us that nature rarely writes its stories in absolutes. The remarkable world surrounding us thrives upon extraordinary balance. Seasons patiently surrender themselves to one another. Day gradually becomes night before quietly returning once again to morning's arrival. Human beings themselves are beautiful collections of countless delicate conversations, patiently unfolding together rather than isolated pieces, moving independently through time. What most people never realize is that health has always possessed remarkable complexity, precisely because human beings themselves remain wonderfully complex. The greatest hidden truths are seldom discovered, hiding at either extreme. They patiently reveal themselves somewhere between simplicity and balance. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is learning that wisdom occasionally sounds remarkably different than certainty. Health has never been a destination patiently waiting for perfection's arrival. It remains one of humanity's greatest lifelong discoveries. And speaking of remarkable discoveries hiding within ordinary assumptions, the next hidden truth has quietly followed generations of Americans into nearly every doctor's office they have ever visited. At number 36 stands one of humanity's oldest health myths: the belief that if everyone experiences something, then it must simply be normal. There is tremendous comfort hidden within shared experiences. When friends describe similar discomforts, or neighbors faithfully exchange familiar stories about growing older, we quietly find reassurance in knowing we are not alone. There is profound beauty within that reassurance. Human beings have always relied upon communities to better understand life's greatest mysteries. Long before modern discoveries transformed our understanding of health, people learned through observation, experience, and the remarkable wisdom faithfully preserved throughout generations. Yet history repeatedly teaches us something infinitely more fascinating. Common experiences and ordinary experiences have never necessarily been identical stories. Entire civilizations once believed remarkably common misconceptions that quietly survived for centuries. Familiarity possesses extraordinary persuasive power precisely because it surrounds us so completely that questioning it occasionally feels unnecessary altogether. What if some of life's most familiar health experiences remain worthy of curiosity simply because they are so common? After 40 and 50, this question becomes increasingly meaningful. Human beings are remarkably generous when explaining things they expect to happen. Sometimes we become so skilled at accepting familiar experiences that we quietly stop wondering whether there might still be more left to understand about them altogether. Perhaps one of the greatest hidden truths of health itself is recognizing that common does not always mean inevitable, and ordinary does not always mean fully understood. Human curiosity continues, rewarding those willing to remain wonderfully surprised by life's extraordinary mysteries. And if familiarity occasionally conceals remarkable stories waiting patiently beneath the surface, the final revelation of this chapter ventures deeper still. At number 35 waits one of modern life's most dangerous health myths: the belief that meaningful change becomes increasingly impossible after 50. Few misconceptions have quietly stolen more extraordinary possibilities from generations of Americans than this one. Somewhere throughout our lives, many of us gradually begin negotiating with tomorrow itself. We lower our expectations patiently rather than suddenly. New experiences quietly become things for younger generations to discover. Personal transformation slowly becomes something we admire in others rather than something we continue imagining for ourselves. History tells a profoundly different story. Some of humanity's most extraordinary accomplishments arrived remarkably late in life. Great artists created masterpieces during their later years. Writers discovered their greatest works long after many would have expected their most productive seasons to have quietly passed. Countless individuals faithfully continued, becoming entirely new versions of themselves throughout decades they were once taught to fear. The hidden truth, waiting here, extends far beyond health alone. Human beings have never been static creations, patiently waiting for time itself to define their possibilities. We remain astonishingly adaptable throughout every remarkable chapter life generously offers us. After 50, perhaps life's greatest privilege is discovering that curiosity has never possessed an expiration date. There remains extraordinary beauty hidden within tomorrow, precisely because tomorrow continues arriving faithfully, regardless of how many remarkable years have already accompanied our journey. The greatest health myth, waiting at number 35, was never simply believing that change becomes impossible. It was quietly believing that life's most meaningful discoveries belong exclusively to our younger selves. History has never agreed with that conclusion, and if humanity has spent generations underestimating what remains possible throughout the later chapters of life itself, then the hidden truths waiting ahead become infinitely more fascinating still. Because we are only beginning to uncover the remarkable stories patiently hiding behind some of the most trusted health advice ever passed from one generation to the next. There is something extraordinary about the myths that survive the longest. They rarely survive because they were intentionally misleading. More often, they endure because they once represented humanity's very best understanding of the remarkable mysteries quietly unfolding within the human body. Health has never been a finished story. It continues revealing fascinating new chapters with every passing generation. Perhaps that is why the most valuable discoveries are so often found hiding within the things we stopped questioning long ago. And the hidden truths waiting before us challenge some of the most familiar beliefs millions of Americans faithfully carry into every new day. At number 34 lies one of the most comforting health myths ever embraced by modern culture: the belief that if something feels good, then it must always be good for us. Human beings have always trusted their experiences. There is profound wisdom hidden within listening carefully to our bodies and appreciating life's simplest pleasures. Throughout history, entire traditions were built upon observations patiently passed from one generation to the next. What feels comforting naturally becomes something we wish to preserve. Yet history quietly reminds us that comfort and understanding have never been identical companions. The remarkable human body possesses extraordinary ways of adapting to familiar experiences. What feels pleasant today may tell an entirely different story tomorrow. Conversely, some of life's greatest gifts occasionally arrive disguised as temporary inconveniences, patiently rewarding us long after the moment itself has passed. Human health has always been infinitely more fascinating than simple categories, patiently separating things into what immediately feels good and what does not. Previous generations understood something beautifully profound about life's greatest treasures. They frequently reveal their value gradually rather than all at once. Seasons patiently transform themselves over time. Wisdom quietly deepens through decades of extraordinary experiences. Health follows remarkably similar rhythms. After 50, this hidden truth becomes increasingly meaningful because life's greatest pleasures begin revealing dimensions our younger selves occasionally overlooked altogether. We discover that what feels good in the moment and what quietly contributes to living beautifully across the decades are not always precisely the same remarkable story. Perhaps curiosity remains one of humanity's greatest companions precisely because it reminds us that comfort deserves appreciation without ever demanding unquestioning acceptance. And if familiar comforts occasionally conceal fascinating hidden truths, the next revelation challenges something millions faithfully believe about their own remarkable resilience. At number 33 waits one of America's most persistent health myths, the belief that our bodies possess limitless patience. There is something undeniably admirable about human endurance. Entire generations proudly built extraordinary lives through perseverance, determination, and remarkable sacrifice. We celebrate stories of individuals overcoming seemingly impossible circumstances because perseverance remains among humanity's greatest virtues. Somewhere along the way, however, perseverance quietly transformed itself into something else entirely. Millions of Americans learned to view their bodies as extraordinarily reliable companions, patiently waiting beside them regardless of how they were treated throughout life's countless seasons. Feeling tired simply became something to overcome. Feeling overwhelmed quietly became evidence of meaningful accomplishment. Rest gradually transformed itself into something negotiated rather than naturally welcomed. History tells a more fascinating story altogether. Human beings have always existed within delicate relationships of extraordinary balance. Nature itself patiently teaches this lesson every single day. The changing seasons never apologize for surrendering themselves gracefully to tomorrow. Day patiently becomes night before quietly returning once again to morning's arrival. Nothing remarkable within the natural world exists entirely apart from restoration itself. What most people never realize is that extraordinary resilience and extraordinary limitations have always existed beautifully side by side. One does not diminish the other. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is finally understanding that wisdom occasionally means extending toward ourselves the very same patience we so generously offer those we love most deeply. Human bodies remain among humanity's greatest miracles precisely because they continue faithfully accompanying us throughout every remarkable chapter of our lives. And if our understanding of resilience itself deserves greater wonder than we once imagined, the next revelation quietly waits within one of modern life's most familiar assumptions. At number 32 stands one of the most persuasive misconceptions of our time, the belief that health is something we either possess completely or have somehow lost altogether. Human beings have always loved simple explanations. Healthy or unhealthy, strong or weak, young or old. Our remarkable minds naturally seek patterns capable of transforming life's extraordinary complexities into beautifully understandable stories. Yet health has never been merely one thing, patiently waiting to be achieved. History repeatedly reminds us that human beings remain infinitely more fascinating than the categories we occasionally create to describe them. Throughout every season of life, our experiences continue quietly evolving alongside us. Health itself behaves remarkably similarly. It has always been an extraordinary conversation rather than a permanent destination. Perhaps that explains why two individuals of identical ages occasionally describe remarkably different experiences of vitality altogether. Human beings have never been collections of isolated experiences, patiently unfolding independently from one another. Rather, we remain beautiful stories, quietly written across decades of extraordinary moments, choices, and possibilities. After 50, this hidden truth becomes increasingly meaningful because growing older frequently teaches us that life's greatest treasures resist simple explanations altogether. Gratitude deepens gradually. Wisdom quietly expands across time. Health reveals itself through countless remarkable dimensions, patiently accompanying us throughout our lives. The hidden truth waiting here is profoundly hopeful. Human vitality was never intended to fit neatly within simple definitions. It remains among life's greatest mysteries precisely because it continues surprising us, regardless of how many remarkable years faithfully accompany our journey. And speaking of remarkable surprises hiding within ordinary assumptions, the final revelation of this chapter ventures deeper still. At number 31 lies one of humanity's oldest and most dangerous health myths, the belief that understanding our health begins only when something goes wrong. For generations, millions of Americans quietly learned to think about health almost exclusively through moments demanding their attention. If discomfort arrives, we naturally become curious. If life continues unfolding peacefully around us, health quietly retreats into the background, while tomorrow's countless responsibilities patiently occupy our thoughts instead. There is something profoundly human about this tendency. We naturally direct our attention toward life's extraordinary moments, while occasionally overlooking the remarkable beauty patiently accompanying ordinary ones. History whispers something infinitely more fascinating. Health was never intended to become merely the absence of difficulty. It has always been something infinitely more extraordinary than that. It quietly accompanies meaningful conversations shared across dinner tables. It faithfully preserves our curiosity for tomorrow's possibilities. It patiently allows us to continue discovering that life's ordinary moments frequently become its most remarkable treasures. After 50, perhaps this hidden truth feels more valuable than any revelation that came before it. Human health has never been life's interruption. It has always been one of life's most faithful companions. The greatest misconception waiting at number 31 was never simply believing that health matters when challenges arise. It was quietly forgetting that vitality itself possesses extraordinary beauty even when life unfolds precisely as we hoped it might. And perhaps that is what makes the remarkable mysteries waiting ahead so endlessly fascinating. We are no longer merely uncovering dangerous health myths, quietly surviving throughout generations. We are gradually rediscovering something previous generations understood intuitively. That health was never simply about adding more years, patiently waiting upon tomorrow's calendar. It has always been about filling those years with as much extraordinary life as possible. And the hidden truths waiting beyond this point become infinitely more remarkable still. There are moments throughout history when humanity quietly discovers that its greatest misunderstandings were never hidden in distant places at all. They were patiently waiting beside the ordinary experiences we encounter every single day. Health possesses a remarkable habit of revealing itself in precisely this way. The deeper we venture into its mysteries, the more extraordinary its hidden truths become. What once appeared beautifully simple gradually reveals remarkable complexity, patiently unfolding beneath the surface. And perhaps that is why the myths waiting before us have survived so faithfully throughout generations. They sound almost too reasonable to question. At number 30 waits one of the most enduring health myths ever inherited by modern society. The belief that our bodies faithfully follow identical rules throughout every season of life. There is undeniable comfort hidden within this assumption. We quietly imagine that what benefited us at 25 should naturally accompany us at 55, without ever requiring a second thought. After all, we remain wonderfully ourselves, regardless of how many birthdays patiently accumulate throughout the years. Yet history quietly whispers something infinitely more fascinating. Human beings have never remained unchanged travelers, moving predictably through time itself. Childhood bears little resemblance to middle age. The extraordinary experiences shaping our 20s quietly surrender themselves to entirely different chapters, patiently waiting beyond tomorrow's horizon. Previous generations understood this intuitively, long before modern discoveries provided elegant explanations for what they faithfully observed throughout their lives. Nature itself patiently reminds us that transformation has always been life's most remarkable companion. Seasons gracefully become one another without ever apologizing for the extraordinary changes accompanying their arrival. Human beings possess similar beauty. We are not merely growing older, we are continually becoming. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is finally appreciating that change itself has never been life's greatest mystery. Rather, it is one of life's greatest gifts. Human vitality has always been a remarkably dynamic conversation, quietly unfolding throughout every passing decade. And if our bodies continue revealing extraordinary new stories as time patiently accompanies us forward, the next hidden truth challenges something millions of Americans faithfully admire every single day. At number 29 lies one of modern life's most persuasive misconceptions: the belief that being busy and being healthy naturally accompany one another. There is something profoundly American about admiring busyness itself. Entire generations proudly built remarkable lives through extraordinary dedication, tireless effort, and meaningful accomplishments patiently earned through decades of perseverance. We celebrate individuals whose calendars remain wonderfully full and whose ambitions continue reaching patiently toward tomorrow's extraordinary possibilities. Yet history offers a fascinating perspective rarely discussed often enough. Human beings have always required both movement and stillness. Great civilizations faithfully understood that meaningful lives were never measured exclusively by productivity alone. Moments of celebration patiently surrendered themselves to moments of quiet reflection. Extraordinary accomplishments quietly shared space beside life's simplest pleasures. Somewhere throughout modern life, however, busyness quietly transformed itself into something resembling virtue altogether. What most people never realize is that fullness and fulfillment have never been identical companions. A calendar crowded faithfully from sunrise until sunset tells remarkably little about the extraordinary story quietly unfolding within the human experience itself. After 50, this hidden truth becomes increasingly meaningful because life's greatest treasures occasionally arrive disguised as wonderfully ordinary moments. Watching autumn leaves quietly surrender themselves to the changing seasons. Listening patiently while old friends share familiar stories once more. Discovering that tomorrow still patiently waits, filled with possibilities worthy of genuine curiosity. Human health has never measured life's value by how relentlessly we pursue tomorrow. It has always faithfully accompanied our ability to appreciate today. And if busyness occasionally conceals remarkable hidden truths of its own, the next revelation quietly waits within one of humanity's oldest assumptions. At number 28 stands one of the most dangerous health myths ever passed faithfully between generations: the belief that human beings are remarkably separate from the natural rhythms quietly surrounding them. Modern civilization has accomplished extraordinary things. We have illuminated darkness itself, transformed communication across continents, and patiently extended humanity's understanding of its own remarkable potential beyond anything previous generations could have imagined possible. Yet amidst these extraordinary accomplishments, we occasionally forget something beautifully simple. Human beings remain part of a remarkably ancient story. For countless generations, our lives quietly unfolded beside changing seasons, rising sunlight, and evenings patiently surrendering themselves to tomorrow's arrival. Nature was never something patiently waiting beyond our windows. It faithfully accompanied humanity throughout every remarkable chapter of its extraordinary story. What makes this hidden truth particularly fascinating, after 50, is recognizing that life's greatest mysteries frequently reveal themselves not through extraordinary discoveries alone, but through rediscovering timeless truths, patiently waiting beside us all along. History repeatedly reminds us that humanity's greatest accomplishments have never required us to become separate from life's remarkable rhythms themselves. Rather, they invite us to understand them more deeply than ever before. And if we remain more beautifully connected to the world surrounding us than modern life occasionally persuades us to believe, the next revelation quietly challenges one of humanity's oldest misconceptions about health itself. At number 27 waits a myth so familiar that millions continue believing it without hesitation every single day. The idea that human health can somehow be separated neatly into individual pieces, patiently existing apart from one another. We speak about our energy, our sleep, our vitality, and our well-being as though they were chapters from entirely different stories altogether. History quietly tells another story. Previous generations frequently understood health through beautifully holistic perspectives long before such conversations became commonplace once again. They recognized something profoundly fascinating about humanity itself. We have never been collections of isolated experiences patiently unfolding independently from one another. Human beings remain remarkable conversations quietly taking place across countless extraordinary dimensions simultaneously. Life itself patiently influences every chapter accompanying the story of who we continue becoming throughout the decades. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest gifts is discovering that simplicity occasionally conceals extraordinary complexity, waiting patiently beneath its surface. Health has never been merely one thing. It remains among humanity's greatest mysteries precisely because it continues revealing beautiful new dimensions, regardless of how long we have been fortunate enough to experience it. And speaking of extraordinary dimensions quietly hiding beneath familiar assumptions, the next revelation ventures deeper still. At number 26 lies one of the most persuasive misconceptions of modern culture: the belief that remarkable health must always feel extraordinary. We imagine vitality announcing itself dramatically each morning, boundless energy patiently waiting beside every sunrise, extraordinary transformations unfolding quickly enough to become tomorrow's remarkable story. Curiously enough, history whispers something infinitely more beautiful than that. Life's greatest treasures have always possessed extraordinary humility. They quietly reveal themselves through ordinary moments, patiently becoming extraordinary simply because we remain fortunate enough to experience them. Genuine vitality frequently sounds remarkably simple. It is laughter arriving effortlessly during meaningful conversations. It is discovering that curiosity faithfully accompanies us throughout another remarkable year of life. It is ending an ordinary afternoon grateful that tomorrow still waits patiently beyond the horizon. After 50, perhaps no hidden truth feels more meaningful than recognizing that life's extraordinary gifts rarely announce themselves loudly enough to demand our immediate attention. More often, they quietly reveal their remarkable presence through moments we might once have hurried past without ever noticing their beauty at all. And if vitality itself possesses infinitely more wonder than modern culture occasionally permits us to imagine, the next revelation challenges something humanity has faithfully believed throughout generations. At number 25 stands one of humanity's oldest and most remarkable health myths: the belief that wisdom naturally arrives with age, while curiosity quietly fades into memory. Somewhere throughout our lives, many people gradually surrender their questions to certainty itself. The world becomes smaller rather than more fascinating. Extraordinary possibilities patiently become things belonging exclusively to younger generations, waiting faithfully beyond tomorrow's horizon. History has never agreed with that conclusion. Some of humanity's greatest discoveries were made by individuals who remained endlessly curious, regardless of which remarkable chapter of life they happened to inhabit. Wisdom has never asked curiosity to quietly surrender its place at the table. The two have always been life's most extraordinary companions. Perhaps that is why curiosity itself remains among humanity's greatest gifts. It patiently reminds us that there are always remarkable truths waiting quietly beyond the things we already believe we understand. Health has always rewarded those willing to continue asking beautiful questions, regardless of how many extraordinary years faithfully accompany their journey. After 50, curiosity becomes something infinitely more valuable than merely learning new things. It quietly preserves our sense of wonder for tomorrow's remarkable possibilities. It faithfully reminds us that life's greatest discoveries seldom belong exclusively to youth. And perhaps most importantly of all, it gently whispers that the extraordinary story of becoming who we are meant to be has never truly finished writing itself. The greatest health myth waiting at number 25 was never simply believing that age changes us. It was quietly believing that wonder itself must somehow diminish along the way. History tells us something infinitely more hopeful than that. And if curiosity remains among humanity's greatest companions, regardless of which remarkable decade patiently accompanies our lives, then the hidden truths waiting ahead become more extraordinary than ever before. Because we are no longer merely uncovering dangerous health myths, we are gradually rediscovering some of life's most remarkable truths, patiently waiting beside us all along. And the greatest revelations have yet to arrive. The most fascinating truths in human history are often the ones that patiently waited beside us all along. They were never hidden because they were impossible to discover, but because they became so familiar that we simply stopped looking closely enough to notice them. Health has always possessed this remarkable quality. The deeper we venture into its mysteries, the more extraordinary the story becomes. Somewhere between modern discoveries and ancient wisdom lies a beautiful realization that perhaps we have never truly finished learning what it means to live well. And the hidden truths waiting before us challenge some of the oldest assumptions humanity continues carrying faithfully into every new day. At number 24 lies one of the most persuasive health myths of modern life, the belief that feeling tired is always the natural price of becoming older. Few misconceptions have quietly accompanied more Americans through middle age than this one. Entire generations have accepted exhaustion with remarkable grace, introducing it almost apologetically during ordinary conversations. "I'm just getting older," they patiently explain. "That's simply how life works now." There is something profoundly human about accepting the experiences that faithfully accompany us throughout the years. Previous generations frequently did the very same thing. They learned to quietly coexist beside whatever life happened to place upon their remarkable journeys. Yet history whispers something infinitely more fascinating. Human beings have always possessed extraordinary capacities for adaptation. We gradually become accustomed to experiences that would have surprised our younger selves. What begins as an occasional afternoon without enthusiasm quietly transforms itself into familiarity. Eventually, we stop describing it as change altogether and simply introduce it as who we are becoming. Perhaps one of life's greatest hidden truths is that exhaustion possesses remarkable disguises. It occasionally borrows the appearance of ordinary aging itself. Sometimes it patiently hides within disappearing curiosity or quietly diminished enthusiasm for tomorrow's possibilities. Human vitality has never been measured exclusively by calendars hanging faithfully upon our walls. After 50, perhaps the more fascinating question is not whether life changes us. That remarkable truth has always accompanied humanity throughout history. Rather, it is whether we occasionally stop expecting tomorrow to offer us extraordinary possibilities simply because yesterday patiently surrendered itself to time. And if exhaustion itself deserves greater curiosity than we have traditionally offered it, the next revelation quietly challenges one of the most familiar beliefs ever inherited from previous generations. At number 23 stands one of humanity's oldest health myths, the belief that the body always announces its needs loudly enough to demand our immediate attention. Human beings have faithfully trusted this assumption throughout countless generations. Hunger tells us when nourishment patiently waits nearby. Thirst quietly requests our attention. Fatigue gently invites us toward restoration itself. The story appears beautifully uncomplicated, yet human history repeatedly reminds us that life's greatest mysteries seldom reveal themselves so simply. Extraordinary things frequently begin quietly. Changing seasons announce themselves patiently through subtle transformations long before autumn finally surrenders itself to winter's arrival. Likewise, some of the body's most fascinating conversations unfold gradually across days, months, and even years without ever demanding center stage. What most people never realize is that human beings possess remarkable talents for overlooking familiarity itself. We occasionally expect life's greatest messages to arrive loudly enough that misunderstanding them becomes impossible altogether. Reality possesses infinitely greater elegance than that. After 50, perhaps one of life's greatest privileges is discovering that wisdom occasionally means learning to appreciate life's quieter conversations. Health has always been infinitely more remarkable than merely responding faithfully whenever discomfort patiently introduces itself. Sometimes curiosity quietly arrives long before certainty itself is willing to follow. And speaking of life's quieter conversations, the next hidden truth reveals how modern culture has gradually transformed one of humanity's greatest virtues into something unexpectedly dangerous. At number 22 waits one of America's most celebrated misconceptions: the belief that pushing through absolutely everything is always evidence of extraordinary strength. Entire generations proudly embraced perseverance as one of humanity's greatest qualities. Families quietly celebrated sacrifice. Communities faithfully admired remarkable determination. There remains undeniable beauty hidden within these timeless values. Yet history quietly reminds us that strength itself has always possessed extraordinary dimensions beyond those immediately visible to the eye. Nature patiently offers remarkable examples of this truth. The strongest trees gracefully surrender their branches to extraordinary storms, rather than resisting them beyond their remarkable limits. Seasons themselves faithfully understand when to bloom brilliantly and when to patiently rest before tomorrow's arrival. Human beings remain no less extraordinary. Somewhere throughout modern life, perseverance occasionally became confused with permanence itself. Rest quietly became something postponed indefinitely. Listening patiently to life's remarkable rhythms gradually transformed itself into something admired less frequently than relentless endurance. After 50, perhaps life's greatest wisdom quietly reminds us that strength has never required becoming immovable altogether. It has always included extraordinary adaptability, profound gratitude, and the remarkable courage required to remain endlessly curious about tomorrow itself. And if humanity has occasionally misunderstood the extraordinary complexity hidden within genuine strength, the next revelation ventures deeper into one of modern life's most persuasive illusions. At number 21 lies a health myth so familiar that millions rarely pause long enough to question it: the belief that life's greatest transformations must always arrive dramatically. Human beings naturally love extraordinary stories. We celebrate remarkable moments capable of changing everything overnight. Great discoveries patiently unfolding across decades rarely receive the very same admiration. Curiously enough, history tells a profoundly different story. Human civilization itself was not built within a single extraordinary afternoon. Great accomplishments quietly revealed themselves through countless ordinary moments, patiently accompanying one another across generations. Human health follows remarkably similar rhythms. Life's most extraordinary transformations frequently arrive disguised as beautifully ordinary experiences, unfolding patiently across time itself. Perhaps this hidden truth becomes increasingly meaningful after 50, because growing older graciously teaches us something youth occasionally overlooks altogether. that extraordinary lives are seldom composed exclusively of extraordinary moments. The simple privilege of awakening curious about tomorrow remains among humanity's greatest gifts. Meaningful conversations shared faithfully across decades gradually become life's greatest treasures. Extraordinary gratitude quietly reveals itself through beautifully ordinary days. Health has always belonged more faithfully to life's remarkable journey than any singular destination, patiently waiting beyond tomorrow's horizon. And if extraordinary change occasionally prefers introducing itself quietly rather than dramatically, the revelations waiting ahead become infinitely more fascinating still. At number 20 stands one of humanity's most dangerous misconceptions: the belief that knowledge itself eventually reaches completion. Few myths have quietly limited human curiosity more completely than this one. Throughout history, countless generations sincerely believed they had finally uncovered life's greatest mysteries, only to discover remarkable new chapters patiently waiting beyond the horizon. Health possesses perhaps the most extraordinary story of all. Ideas once accepted unquestioningly throughout previous centuries gradually surrendered themselves to remarkable discoveries. Humanity's understanding continues expanding beautifully, precisely because curiosity itself has never stopped asking extraordinary questions. After 50, perhaps curiosity becomes life's most valuable companion, not because it promises certainty, but because it faithfully preserves our capacity for wonder itself. The moment we become convinced there is nothing more left to discover may quietly become the moment life's greatest mysteries patiently stop introducing themselves altogether. Human beings were never intended to become finished stories. Neither was our remarkable understanding of health itself. And if curiosity remains one of humanity's greatest treasures, then the final revelation of this chapter quietly waits to reveal perhaps its most beautiful hidden truth of all. At number 19 lies one of the oldest and most dangerous health myths humanity has ever believed: the idea that growing older means gradually becoming less extraordinary. Somewhere throughout our remarkable journeys, millions of people quietly begin measuring their futures through subtraction rather than possibility itself. Energy becomes something previously possessed. Curiosity patiently belongs to younger generations. Tomorrow somehow becomes smaller than yesterday. History has never agreed with such conclusions. There are stories faithfully preserved throughout every generation of individuals, discovering entirely new chapters of extraordinary lives, long after society expected their greatest adventures to have already surrendered themselves to memory. Human beings remain astonishingly beautiful creations, precisely because becoming who we are was never intended to finish halfway through life's remarkable journey. What most people never learn is that health has never been merely about preserving what already exists. It has always been equally concerned with what remains wonderfully possible. After 50, perhaps tomorrow possesses greater mystery than ever before. Gratitude deepens beautifully across the decades. Ordinary moments reveal extraordinary meaning previously hidden within plain sight. Curiosity patiently discovers entirely new questions worthy of remarkable answers. The greatest misconception waiting at number 19 was never simply believing that time changes us. It was quietly believing that time inevitably diminishes life's extraordinary possibilities. History patiently tells another story altogether, and if humanity has spent generations underestimating what remains possible throughout the remarkable later chapters of life itself, then the hidden truths waiting ahead become infinitely more extraordinary than anything we have yet discovered. Because we are approaching the revelations that challenge not merely how we understand health, but how we understand the remarkable privilege of living itself. There comes a moment in every remarkable journey when familiar questions quietly surrender themselves to far more fascinating ones. Throughout this documentary, we have gradually uncovered hidden truths, patiently waiting beneath some of humanity's oldest health myths. Yet the revelations before us venture deeper still. They no longer ask us merely to reconsider what we believe about health. Instead, they quietly invite us to reconsider what we believe about ourselves. Because perhaps the greatest misconceptions humanity has faithfully carried throughout history were never about individual habits or isolated experiences at all. They have always been about the extraordinary relationship between time, vitality, and the remarkable privilege of continuing to discover both. At number 18 waits one of modern life's most dangerous health myths, the belief that ordinary suffering should simply be accepted as the unavoidable companion of meaningful living. There is something profoundly admirable about humanity's remarkable resilience. Entire generations quietly persevered through extraordinary hardships while faithfully preserving hope for tomorrow's arrival. Their stories deserve both gratitude and admiration. Yet somewhere along the way, endurance itself quietly became confused with expectation. Millions of Americans gradually began accepting far less from life than previous generations might have imagined possible. Feeling consistently exhausted became understandable. Living without enthusiasm patiently became ordinary. Extraordinary mornings quietly surrendered themselves to familiar routines, faithfully repeated without ever questioning whether something infinitely more beautiful might still be waiting beyond tomorrow's horizon. History whispers something remarkably hopeful instead. Human beings have always possessed extraordinary capacities, not merely for survival, but for restoration itself. Perhaps one of life's greatest hidden truths is recognizing that vitality was never intended to become life's luxury, reserved exclusively for youth. Curiosity possesses no expiration date. Wonder remains beautifully timeless. Gratitude quietly deepens rather than diminishes throughout life's remarkable seasons. After 50, perhaps growing older was never intended to mean expecting less from tomorrow altogether, and if humanity has quietly learned to accept experiences that deserve greater curiosity than we have traditionally offered them,